German tank crews thought they had the best machines on the battlefield until they faced an enemy that seemed to move and strike as one. What was the secret behind the Sherman's uncanny coordination? Hidden inside every American tank was a revolutionary FM radio system, letting crews talk, plan, and outmaneuver the enemy in real time. While German Panzers fought in silence, the Shermans fought as a network. This is the untold story of how battlefield communication, not just firepower, won the war. In the chaos of World War II, the thunder of tank battles echoed across continents. German Panzers Tiger, Panther, and Mark IV were feared for their armor and firepower. But inside every American Sherman tank, a quiet revolution was taking place. It wasn't the gun, the armor, or the engine that would change the course of armored warfare. It was the voice in the ear, the message in the headset, the invisible network that let American tank crews fight as one. The Sherman tank story is often told as a story of underdogs, outgunned and outarmored by the mighty Tigers and Panthers. The Sherman was dismissed by many as a death trap, but what most never saw was the real advantage inside. The SCR-508 FM radio, a 25-watt, crystal-controlled marvel that let every Sherman talk to every other Sherman, every minute of every battle. Only 1 in 5 German tanks had a basic 10-watt AM radio, plagued by static, interference, and short range. Every single Sherman rolled into battle with a direct line to its platoon, its company, and its commanders. The result was that American tank units could coordinate attacks, call for support, and adapt to the chaos of battle in real time, while German crews fought in isolation, relying on flares, flags, and shouted commands. The first time the Germans encountered this invisible weapon was at Kasserine Pass. The Americans were green, their tactics untested, and their tanks outmatched. But as the battle raged, something strange happened. Sherman units, battered and bloodied, began to move with a new precision. Orders crackled over the airwaves. Platoons regrouped, flanked, and counterattacked. The Germans, used to confusion and chaos among their enemies, found themselves facing an opponent that seemed to anticipate their every move. It was the beginning of a new kind of warfare, one where information, not just armor, decided who lived and who died. The secret was frequency modulation FM, and like the German AM radios, which picked up every burst of static, every engine spark, and every enemy transmission, the American FM radios delivered clear, reliable communication. Even in the heat of battle, with 25 watts of power and a range of up to 10 miles, the SCR-508 let tank commanders talk, plan, and react faster than ever before. For the first time, armored warfare became a networked fight. A Sherman platoon could split up, attack from multiple directions, and still stay in perfect sync. A company commander could call in artillery, request air support, or warn of an ambush all with the push of a button. The battlefield was no longer a place of confusion and guesswork. It was a chessboard, and the Americans could see every piece. German tank ace Otto Carius would later describe the confusion of facing American tanks that seemed to move like a school of fish. He said, "We would see the Shermans appear on one flank, then another. They always seemed to know where we were, to react before we could. We thought it was luck or numbers. We never imagined it was their radios." The Germans had their own radios, but only in command tanks. Most crews relied on hand signals, colored flags, or even running messengers between vehicles, in the noise and smoke of battle. These methods broke down. Orders were missed, attacks stalled, and confusion reigned. The few radios they had were often unreliable. their aim signals drowned out by static or intercepted by the enemy. For the Americans, the radio was more than a tool, it was a lifeline. Crews developed their own slang, their own codes, their own ways of keeping morale high even as shells exploded around them. The radio let them share information, warn of danger, and call for help. It turned a collection of tanks into a team into a force, and a force into a victory. By the time of D-Day, every American tank unit was a networked machine. As the Shermans pushed through the hedgerows of Normandy, their radios let them coordinate with infantry, artillery, and air support. When a German ambush was spotted, the warning went out in seconds. When a breakthrough was needed, tanks from different units converged on the target. Guided by voices on the air, the Germans, still fighting with hand signals and hope, found themselves outmaneuvered again and again. Even the mighty Tiger and Panther tanks, with their thick armor and powerful guns, were helpless when cut off from support, surrounded by Shermans that seemed to appear from every direction. Field Commander Heinz Guderian wrote in his wartime notes about the invisible hand that guided American attacks. He said, "Our tanks were superior, but our communications were not. The Americans could coordinate attacks across miles of battlefield. We fought as individuals, they fought as a network." This was the true revolution of the Sherman tank, not in steel or fire, but in the airwaves that connected every crew, every gun, every soldier. It was a lesson the world would not forget. The war moved on, and with every new campaign, the power of the Sherman's radio network became more obvious. In Italy, as American and British forces pushed up the rugged peninsula, tank battles were often fought in narrow valleys and mountain passes where visibility was limited, and confusion reigned. German defenders relied on ambushes and carefully prepared positions, but the Americans had a new advantage. When a Sherman tank spotted a threat, the warning could be sent instantly to every other tank in the platoon. A single voice on the radio could save lives, change tactics, and turn a potential disaster into a coordinated counterattack. Tank commanders learned to trust the voices in their headsets as much as the men in their turrets. They called for smoke screens, artillery barrages, or air support with a few words. They could warn of mines, hidden anti-tank guns, or enemy infantry. The radio became the nervous system of the armored force, connecting every part to the whole. In the chaos of battle, it was the difference between order and confusion, between survival and destruction. German tank crews, by contrast, often fought in silence. Only the platoon leader's tank had a radio, and even then, the range was short and the signal unreliable. Orders had to be relayed by hand signals or runners. A dangerous and slow process under fire. In the heat of battle, tanks could become separated, cut off, or even fire on their own side by mistake. The Germans had some of the best tanks in the world, but they fought as individuals, not as a team. As American and British forces punched through the German lines at Saint-La, the Shermans advanced in waves, each tank in constant contact with the others. When a German counterattack threatened to break through, the call went out over the radio. Tigers on the left, hold your fire until they're in range. The Shermans shifted position, set up crossfires, and waited. When the German tanks appeared, the Americans were ready. The result was a rout. The German attack collapsed, and the road to Paris was open. For the men inside the Shermans, the radio was a source of confidence. They knew they were never alone. Even when a tank was hit and the crew forced to bail out, the call for help could go out instantly. Rescue teams, medics, or supporting infantry could be summoned in seconds. The radio gave the Americans a sense of control, even in the chaos of battle. The Germans noticed. In captured documents and post-war interviews, German officers repeatedly expressed their frustration at the way American tanks seemed to move and fight as a single organism. They described the radio discipline of the Americans, the way they could shift from attack to defense, from advance to retreat, with a speed and precision the Germans could not match. Some German commanders tried to compensate by issuing more radios, but the shortage of equipment, the complexity of the technology, and the constant pressure of Allied bombing made it impossible to catch up. The technical superiority of the SCR-508 radio was not just a matter of range or clarity. It was also about reliability. The American radios were rugged, easy to repair, and resistant to interference. They used crystal-controlled frequencies, which meant that every tank in a unit could be tuned to the same channel with perfect accuracy. The FM signal cut through static, engine noise, and even enemy jamming. In contrast, the German AM radios were vulnerable to every spark plug, every burst of static, every nearby transmission. In the heat of battle, the difference was night and day. The impact of this communications revolution was felt at every level of command. Platoon leaders could coordinate their tanks in real time. Company commanders could direct multiple platoons, shifting forces to meet new threats or exploit opportunities. Battalion and regimental commanders could monitor the progress of the battle, issue new orders, and respond to changing conditions. The entire armored force became a single, flexible, and responsive weapon. The story of the Sherman's radios is also a story of the men who used them. Tank crews developed their own language, their own codes, their own traditions. They gave their radios nicknames, decorated their headsets, and invented songs and jokes about the voices on the air. The radio was a source of comfort, a link to home, and sometimes a lifeline in the darkest moments. One veteran recalled, "The radio was our guardian angel. It told us where the enemy was, where our friends were, and what to do next. Without it, we would have been lost." Another said, "I trusted the voice on the radio more than I trusted my own eyes. It saved my life more than once." As the Allies advanced into Germany, the power of the radio network became even more important. The battles grew larger, the front lines more fluid, and the need for coordination more urgent. The Shermans led the way, their radios crackling with orders, warnings, and encouragement. The Germans, fighting with dwindling resources and failing communications, could only react. In the final battles of the war, the difference was decisive. At the crossing of the Rhine, at the encirclement of the Ruhr, and in the race to Berlin, the American tanks moved with a speed and coordination that stunned their enemies. The radio had become the true engine of victory. The final months of the war in Europe saw the Sherman-S radio network reach its full potential, as American and Allied forces surged across the Rhine and into the heart of Germany. The pace of operations accelerated beyond anything the Wehrmacht could match. The front lines shifted daily, sometimes hourly, and the ability to communicate instantly became more important than ever. Sherman tank units advanced in columns that stretched for miles, each tank in constant contact with the others. When a bridge was blown or a road blocked, the news traveled up and down the line in seconds. Platoon leaders could reroute their tanks, call for engineers, or request air support without ever leaving their vehicles. The radio net became a living map of the battlefield, updated in real time by the men who fought and died on its front lines. In these final battles, The Germans were often forced to fight in isolation. Their tanks, scattered and outnumbered, could not coordinate their movements or concentrate their fire. Even the vaunted Tiger and Panther tanks, so feared for their armor and guns, became easy prey when cut off from support. American tankers learned to use their radios not just for attack, but for defense, setting up ambushes, laying traps, and luring German tanks into kill zones where the Sherman's numbers and coordination could overwhelm even the strongest enemy. The radio also became a tool for survival. When a tank was hit, the crew could call for help, direct medics to the wounded, or warn others of mines and anti-tank guns. In the confusion of battle, the ability to speak directly to other crews saved countless lives. One veteran remembered, "We lost tanks, but we didn't lose men the way the Germans did. If we got hit, we could call for help. If they got hit, they were on their own." The psychological impact of the radio network was profound. American tankers felt connected, supported, and confident. They knew that help was never far away, that their commanders were watching, and that their actions mattered. The Germans, by contrast, often felt alone, cut off, and abandoned. The difference showed in the way the two armies fought and in the way they surrendered. The story of the Sherman's radios is also a story of innovation and adaptation. As the war progressed, American engineers continued to improve the SCR-508 and its successors. New features were added, new frequencies assigned, and new tactics developed. The radio net expanded to include not just tanks, but infantry, artillery, and air support. The entire American army became a single, integrated force, able to respond to threats and opportunities with unprecedented speed. German commanders recognized the threat, but by then it was too late. The factories that might have produced better radios were bombed. The supply lines that might have delivered them were cut, and the men who might have used them were dead or captured. The communications gap that had begun as a small advantage in North Africa had become a decisive factor in the defeat of the Third Reich. After the war, the lessons of the Sherman's radio network were studied by armies around the world. The principle was clear. In modern warfare, the ability to communicate is as important as the ability to shoot. The networked force will always defeat the isolated one, no matter how strong its individual weapons. The veterans who fought in the Shermans never forgot the voices on the radio. For many, those voices were the sound of hope, of courage, and of victory. They remembered the jokes, the songs, the codes, and the calls for help. They remembered the feeling of being part of something larger than themselves, a team, a unit, a brotherhood connected by invisible threads of sound. One former tank commander wrote, "We didn't win because our tanks were better. We won because we could talk to each other. We won because we were never alone." As the world moved into the Cold War, the lessons of the Sherman's radios shaped the next generation of armored vehicles, aircraft, and even infantry units. The idea of the networked battlefield became the foundation of modern military doctrine. Today, every soldier, every vehicle, every weapon is part of a vast web of communication, a legacy that began with the humble -508 Seychelles rupees in the turret of a Sherman tank. The story of the Sherman's radios is not just a story of technology. It is a story of people, of the men who built the radios, the crews who used them, and the commanders who learned to trust the voices in their ears. It is a story of teamwork, of innovation, and of the quiet revolution that changed the face of war. In the aftermath of victory, the true impact of the Sherman's radio network became clear not only to the Allies, but to the defeated German commanders as well. As American and British forces occupied Germany, captured officers and tank crews were interrogated about their experiences, again and again. They spoke of the bewildering speed and coordination of the Allied attacks. Some admitted that they had never understood how the Shermans seemed to appear everywhere at once, how they could regroup after setbacks, or how they always seemed to know when and where to strike. The answer, they learned, was not just in numbers or tactics, but in the invisible web of communication that linked every American tank on the battlefield. For the German veterans, this realization was both humbling and sobering. Many had prided themselves on the technical superiority of their tanks, the discipline of their crews, and the brilliance of their commanders, but in the end, it was the ability to share information, to adapt in real time, and to fight as a unified force that had made the difference. The lesson was not lost on the next generation of military leaders, in Germany and on the world. The story of the Sherman S radios also became a touchstone for the men who had fought in those tanks. At reunions and in memoirs, veterans recalled the moments when a calm voice on the radio had saved their lives, when a warning had turned the tide of a skirmish, or when a simple joke had broken the tension before a battle. They remembered the static, the call signs, the codes, and the sense of belonging that came from being part of a team that could always reach out and be heard. For some, the radio was more than a tool of war, it was a symbol of hope. In the darkest hours, when the outcome was uncertain and the losses heavy, the knowledge that someone was listening, that help could be summoned, and that orders could be given and received, gave them the strength to carry on. The radio was the heartbeat of the armored force, steady and reliable, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. The legacy of the Sherman's radio network did not end with the war. In the decades that followed, armies around the world adopted the principles of networked warfare. Radios became standard equipment in every tank, every vehicle, every squad. The lessons learned in the fields of Europe were applied in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. The idea that communication could be as decisive as firepower became a cornerstone of modern military doctrine. Today, the descendants of the SCR-508 can be found in the digital radios and satellite links that connect soldiers on every continent. The technology has changed, but the principle remains the same: the ability to share information, to coordinate action, and to adapt to changing circumstances is the key to victory. The story of the Sherman S radios is a reminder that the most important revolutions are often invisible. They happen not in the roar of the guns, but in the quiet moments when a voice is heard, a warning is given, or a plan is made. They are the product of ingenuity, teamwork, and the relentless pursuit of a better way to fight. As the veterans of World War II pass into history, their stories endure. The voices that once crackled over the airwaves now echo in the memories of those who served, and in the lessons passed down to new generations. The Sherman tank may be remembered for its flaws as well as its strengths, but its greatest legacy is the network that connected its crews, gave them confidence, and helped them win a war against the odds. In the end, the Germans never knew the full extent of the advantage the Americans held. They saw the tanks, they heard the guns, but they never understood the power of the voices that guided every move, every shot, every victory. The world's most advanced radios, hidden in plain sight, had changed the course of history.